place.
Welcome back. You're watching NewsX. My name is Vineet Malhotra. Extreme poverty in India has seen a sharp decline over the past decade, with latest estimates from the World Bank showing a steep fall from 27.1% in the year 2011-12 to 5.3% in 2022-23. The number of people living under extreme poverty dipped from 344.47 million to 75.24 million, showing that nearly 270 million people were brought out of poverty in the span of 10 years. The World Bank's latest assessment reveals substantial poverty reduction despite implementing a stricter criteria, which includes raising the poverty benchmark to $3 per person per day from the previous criteria of $2.15. The World Bank's report attributed the trend to free and subsidized food transfers that supported poverty reduction, with the rural-urban poverty gap also narrowing down. Apart from being a massive domestic feat, India has also emerged as a crucial factor in offsetting a sharp global rise in poverty following the World Bank's significant revision to the international poverty line. The revision, which would have otherwise increased the global tally of extreme poverty by 226 million people, had its impact cushioned by India's updated consumption data, resulting in a net global increase of just 125 million. We'll talk about this with our guest. Joining us on the show is Mr. Gautam Mukherjee, senior journalist, Ambassador Suresh Kumar Goyal, former diplomat, also with us on the program. Mithali Nikore, senior economist, joins us on the show as well. And last but by no means the least, Dr. Sharat Kohli, senior economist, also with us on the program. All right, well, let's begin our conversation. Ambassador Goyal, I would begin with you. Well, this is a great feat. As we all remember, poverty was a word which followed India and India's image like Peter Pan's shadow. But now it seems that India has come out of it. What would you attribute this sea change to, sir? I want to know your opinion.
Vineet, it's actually quite unfair of you to put me in the line first. We have two economists here who can give a better view on this rather than me. And I was
sir, I chose you. Okay. I chose you because you have represented India more than any one of us abroad.
Okay, I take your point. Vineet, there has been a considerable discussion on this in the Indian, not just media, but even the informed circles and the discussions at the level of economists, the various think tanks. It has been discussed threadbare. And the point really is that when we look at the poverty line and when we look at the consumption expenditure, how do we compute it? It's always a matter of satisfaction to see that so many people have actually shifted or moved across the poverty line. Matter of always great happiness. But when such a large number of people move across the poverty line, the first question really is whether this is actually a play on the data or this actually is an increase on the per capita income. Now, if we look at the GDP has definitely grown, and there's no doubt about it. But has it grown so much to really say that the per capita GDP has grown so much to say that so many people have moved across the poverty line? Therefore, my point of view really would be that yes, there is definitely a better per capita consumption, but the per capita consumption is better not on grounds of increase in the per capita income, but basically because of the welfare schemes, basically because of the food subsidies, the food being given at the different levels. But if we have to look at this data from the point of view of actual generation of income and the actual generation of employment, that's entirely a different story. And therefore, I would be, while I'm happy that yes, there are not many people living under the poverty line or they're having more to eat. But at the same time, I would be happier if we had equally good data about the generation of employment and the per capita income. That is how I would really feel.
All right, fair enough. Dr. Kohli, coming to you, the feat is extraordinary, but there's a lot of work that has gone behind this very technically proficient way in which poverty has been eliminated in our country. You've been on several shows where we have actually discussed how India has been able, to cure this affliction, which has stuck around ever since independence, ever since 1947. How much of a credit would you like to give the government in terms of its ambition and the completion of that ambition?
Well, good evening, Vineet. Good evening to my fellow panelists and NewsX viewers. I think there have been concerted efforts over the last, more than a decade now. In fact, you look at this World Bank comment, it comes from 2011-12, it talks from 2011-12. So it practically sort of encompasses the government prior to this as well. But of course, the real pace has picked up ever after the NDA government, took over. I'm not sounding political in this because I've seen the schemes being implemented, and where what we are and where we are is primarily because of the initiatives of the government from 1947 we need to 2014. We reached barely $2 trillion in terms of the GDP. And from 2014 to 2025, in 11 years, we reached 4.187 or $4.188 trillion dollars. We more than doubled what we didn't do in 67 years. We ended up doing in 11 years. So something good must have been done. I mean, there's nothing political about this. It's all about the numbers. So I think the various initiatives taken by the government, and the biggest initiative, which I feel, apart from the welfare scheme, there's a very long list, more than 800 schemes, Vineet. I mean, I can burn away the rest of your show time, and Mitali and Gautam are going to kill me that you didn't let us speak on that. But I only like to say that the biggest takeaway would be, in this case, the infrastructure spend which the government has done. I think that has made the big difference in the economy lifting itself from where we were in the fragile five, if you remember, in 2014. We were the 11th largest economy. Today we are the fourth largest, on our course to become the third largest. Infrastructure spending has made a lot of difference because that has a multiplier effect in economics. Every 1 rupee spent on infrastructure, we need, leads to an 8 times multiplier effect. So that really takes people out. I mean, Manrega and Garib Kalyan Yojana, these are welfare schemes. Of course, people do benefit. People are still getting 5 kilos of food grains every month. 81 crore, 30 lakh people in India are getting food grain. But an interesting aspect beneath of this data released by World Bank is that, because there was a lot of criticism. I've been in innumerable, shows. Probably I can't even count the number of shows I've sat on various channels where I was questioned that you say that 25 crore plus people have come out of multi-dimensional poverty index, where living standard improved, health and education facilities included. It's not that people had a lot of money in their banks. Please keep this in mind. These people didn't have a lot of bank balance when they came out of poverty, but the living standard, education, health facilities, be it PM Awas, the toilets, the nutrition facilities, there is a very long list, as I said. So the interesting aspect is that the World Bank data now corroborates with the Niti Aayog data. The Niti Aayog data said 25 crore people came out of multidimensional poverty index. And now World Bank is corroborating that. So I think this is kind of a stamp, because some people were saying Niti Aayog is part of Government of India. Obviously it could be driven by the ruling party's mandate, and all sorts of accusations. But now what about World Bank? If World Bank says the same thing. And another interesting aspect, Vineet, is that $3 a day is about 7,500 rupees per month. So I mean, this is a different aspect of what I'm saying. 7,500 rupees per month for a person earning that much. Can we consider him to be out of poverty line, below the poverty line? That we need to go back to ask World Bank, because can a person, a family, survive in 7,500 rupees a month? Well, that's anybody's guess. So, but accepting the benchmark which World Bank has set, I think it's very, very creditable. Make in India, Startup India, Stand Up India, Ujjwala Yojana, Mudra Yojana, the toilets being built, electricity, Nal Se Jal, given to the villagers. there have been long lists. I think that has brought people out of the poverty line. So all hats off to this government. And there is no magic in guessing this, because if you simply have to see the GDP, the total GDP, and GDP trickles down. Now somebody asked me that GDP is a number. If GDP is a number, then how does it affect my economy? The fact of the matter is that the way GDP is calculated, there's a very complicated formula. I'm sure Vitali is also quite familiar with the formula, but it's in easy terms, it's goods and services produced by me and you. So after all, the people are making the GDP. So the GDP numbers corroborated, the Niti Aayog numbers corroborated, and now the World Bank has corroborated. So we are no more. I remember when I was very young. I was in my class 5, and my Hindi teacher gave me an essay to write, and the essay was कि आप India पे essay लिख के लाओ. So my mother used to teach me. I was very young. My mother was a MA in Hindi literature at that time, and then she was a doctorate in Hindi literature. So I sat down on the bed with her. The very first sentence she told me is, when I started writing on India, भारत एक गरीब देश है. I can never forget that sentence. Never ever forget that sentence. It's been so many years now, decades. I never forgot that. I think we finally come out of this sentence, which my mother told me decades ago, Vineet.
It's very heartening to hear, Dr. Kohli. In fact, that's a story that all of us grew up with, Gautam, and that's a story which perhaps will become a part of only memory now, as India has done extremely well, extensively well, when it comes to eliminating poverty, something that has been attached with India, something that has, leached off with India and its image.
Well, Vineet, when you double your GDP between 2014 and now, there are two things at play here. Quite apart from everything that Sharad has just said, which I endorse, you've got a compounding effect. It's not an up and down GDP. Every year you are turning out at least 6%. It's 6% plus for over 10 years. Some years quite a bit more, certain quarters quite a bit more, others quite a bit less, but 6% is a certainty, and that is better than anybody else in the world. In addition to that, the much debated trickle-down effect. It's welfare, it's greater spread of the money, but trickle-down effect of $4.19 trillion is substantial. It reaches every corner, nook and cranny of the country, and every individual is benefited. You only have to look around you. Extreme poverty is gone. Everybody, even very poor people, seem to have much more than they used to. Of course, there are pockets in the country that are backward and behind the rest of it. Most of them in eastern India. Part of it is to do with the politics of the place, where they sort of, communism tends to glorify poverty, and where there is a law and order mismatch, and things are not allowed to function properly. But given that to one side, you've got a general rise in prosperity all around. Now look at the implications. If you brought it down to 5%, and that represents 75%, 75 million people currently, by the time we become the the third largest economy, which is just around the corner, say 2 years from now, this extreme poverty, even if the World Bank once again tweaks the figures, will be eliminated. We'll be at 5 trillion plus. And that will be the end of that. We are not a Garib country. We never were. It was bad politics and bad economics that held us back over 50 years, ever since we became independent. Then things started improving, and it's really a 20-year story. Part of it does go to the previous government ever since 91, and then it picked up momentum as we went along, and you have the present situation. This is commendable. Vinit.
Ali, your thoughts on this amazing feat?
Thanks.
And what's astounding about this, that the predominant part of eliminating this kind of astute, prolific poverty was done in just a decade.
Yeah, absolutely. Vineet, I really want to point out two or three very specific things, building on what Sharadji, Gautam, and Sureshji, just sort of laid out very nicely. What were the main drivers of this? Let's understand that because we want to replicate these successes even more. The first biggest driver of success, which has been pointed out in the report, is five major welfare schemes that were started by the government. The first one, which has been mentioned, is actually the PM Awas Yojana. And the PM Awas Yojana is so critical because having a roof on your head, as somebody who is experiencing multidimensional poverty, experiencing absolutely no hope of ever being able to have a roof on your head, and then you get that roof on your head, that has been a game changer, which has been introduced in the last 10 years. The second biggest scheme is actually the Ayushman Bharat scheme. And if you look at the entire narrative which we used to study in our textbooks in school, we used to always be told everybody who is actually even lower middle income is one health crisis away from falling into the poverty line. Now, when you introduce health insurance scheme, you are protecting that person from falling back into poverty because everyone is going to have a health crisis at some point or the other for somebody in their household. And that's how we were even able to manage a health crisis as large as COVID. And then on top of that, of course, you have the food subsidy schemes, the Garib Kalyan Yojana, which of course helped the entire country's almost 800 million people, manage COVID. But one scheme which again does not get enough credit is the Ujjwala Yojana, because even the provision of free cooking gas to the women of this country was actually again a game changer because they don't have to then go into the forest and collect forest fires, and think about the improvement in their lung capacity, in the indoor pollution that women were experiencing, that they could benefit from the Ujjwala Yojana. And the fifth scheme which the report mentions is actually the Jan Dhan Yojana, the Jan Trinity. And that of course, we have spoken about the fact that the digital public infrastructure has been a complete game changer in how we actually provide benefits. You see, the leakage of providing benefits were always being provided, whether it's the 1960s or the 1970s or the 1980s. But there was such a big narrative around the corruption, which meant that a lot of the benefits were being leaked away from the populations that deserved it. And now, with the digital public infrastructure, the technology to monitor this, the dashboards that you see that are populated on an everyday basis, it has changed the way government schemes are being delivered, and it reduces the cost of delivery of the government schemes as well. And the other point which I'd like to make is really around where the poverty reduction has happened. And five states have really led this entire charge. Of course, number one is Uttar Pradesh, where we've seen massive amount of poverty reduction. Maharashtra has seen huge poverty reduction. And it's a high income state, so we never think about poverty in a state like Maharashtra, but it does exist. There are pockets, and the government has done a phenomenal job there. Bihar, West Bengal, and Madhya Pradesh. Madhya Pradesh is one state which, again, the report also says has transformed. I remember myself visiting some of the villages in Madhya Pradesh about 10 years ago. And then when I recently went again, all of them with pakka houses, with women, leading the charge when it came to rural community development, huge amount of SHGs, trading outside the state. So I honestly think that, what you're seeing on ground today, it's translating. And the last point I'll make is around the numbers, because of course we've been talking about the $3 poverty rate, which the report says has gone from 27% to 5.3% when we consider the poverty line at $3 a day. Even when you raise the poverty line to $4.2 a day, which is a new poverty line that the World Bank has been experimenting with, the poverty reduction in India actually goes from 57.7% in 2011-12 to 23.9% in 22-23, which means nearly 400 million people are lifted out of poverty in the last decade, even when you raise the poverty line to $4.2 a day. So I feel like, as Gautamji also just said, even when you keep on raising that line, you'll still see that, the benefits are trickling down only because of the intentional nature in which the government subsidies have been designed and delivered. Back to you.
Right. And Ambassador Goel, it also proves the point that these subsidies or this help that the government has given to the poor is not only serving the purpose which is so politicized, which is elections. It is also for a larger cause.
Vineet, let me get away from the politics of it all. Even though development and growth is something where politics is always very closely involved, if not entangled. In fact, the real word is entangled. You cannot think of development and growth without politics. But anyway, the point really here is, uh, as I said in the beginning, yes, it's a very, very gratifying thought that the World Bank has taken cognizance of our welfare schemes and how they have contributed to quote unquote poverty reduction. And this reminds me of basically having been a diplomat, that wherever we were, we used to wait with abated breath the reports from the World Bank, Asian Development Bank on the economic situation of the country where we were located, because that would give us really where they were doing. So this today's discussion actually reminds me of that kind of a thing, analyzing the reports from the World Bank. The point really here is very simple. Yes, in terms of the welfare schemes that we have established, the people have been able to overcome the extreme poverty. Good. The point really here is, are we going to be able to subsist our poverty with the welfare schemes? I agree with Sharad when he says about the infrastructural spend. That's a great way to really overcome the poverty people, because infrastructure, and I completely agree that every rupee spent on infrastructure goes on to generate 8 times the income for the people, really, the way they proceed. Great idea. But beyond that, do we have any change in India? How does it happen that when I'm driving across the roads, even in Delhi, and as I cross the Mehrauli bridge over Mehrauli over overpass, 20 people begging for money come to the car. The number has increased over the previous 10, 15 years. How does it happen that the number of people in the rural areas who are standing near a pawn shop, basically doing nothing but running mobiles? How does it happen that the number of people who are making all these kind of stupid reels has increased? What I'm saying here, Vineet, is that we need to work on constructive engagement of people in productive economic areas. That has not happened. And that has to happen at the same time where we are increasing the subsist on the consumption expenditure. Vineet.
Dr. Kohli, we are at little close to a 5 trillion at this point in time. Of course, we're going to be closing in. We are closing in on Germany with a lot of acceleration. China is at around 20 trillion. The Americans are at 30 trillion. India will get to the number 3 position, but the gap between China, India, and the United States, it's still a large gulf. What do you think is needed in the next few years, say the next decade or so, to bridge that gap and become at least the number 2 economy in the world?
You pulled it from my mouth, Vineet. I was about to, because we've been speaking of the hits. We also need to speak about the misses. What is lacking and where we still need to go a long way. I think if you look at the numbers, per capita income, if you look, it's about $2,800, which is surely because we calculate the per capita income by dividing the total GDP by the population. Now, the denominator somehow happens to be very, very large. When you divide the GDP of 4.18, the fourth largest economy in the world with 145 crores, obviously the per capita goes down. And we are lagging on per capita. That's one of the criticism which is thrown across India, not just on the political circle, but it's a general criticism on the country that you may be 4 trillion, but look at your per capita income. That's one. Second, I think we still have 50 to 60% of our people dependent on agriculture. Nothing wrong. But the contribution of that sector to the GDP is only 16 to 17%. So 16 to 17% being contributed by 50 to 60%, I think that is a skewed number. Then the gross inequality of income. We have 1% of the country holding 47% of country's wealth. I think that income and wealth inequality is still a very gaping hole. Education, I would say, is another area where we need to work. And a very interesting aspect, Vineet, with I'm sure my co-panelists would agree to me, and I would particularly like to draw Mitali's attention to this. There are two aspects. One is women participation in the workforce in the country is around 30 to 32%. Now, half of the population, when you look at some of the other developed countries, where women work as much as the men do in the economic participation. I'm talking, although if they're homemakers, there's nothing wrong in that. That is an economy by itself, which is not numbered. There are no numbers which are officially contributed to the GDP, although the numbers are notional and they should be contributed to my mind. So I think women's participation needs to be increased. And the second important aspect which I wanted to mention is that the journey, this is to be very carefully understood, the journey from being extremely poor to being poor or lower middle class is quicker. But the journey from being poor to middle class, I find a lot of people who prospered. This is my personal experience. They were in extreme poverty. Today they earn, 20, 15, 20,000 rupees, but they get stuck at that. That is because the lack of skills and lack of education. 90% of the people beneath in our country at the moment, this number is astonishing. 90%, which means 126 crore people in India earn less than 25,000 rupees a month. This shows that the journey from extremely poor to poor is quicker, and from poor to lower middle class may be quicker as per Niti Aayog's multidimensional poverty index. But the journey from being prosperous, the journey to being wealthy is very, very tough. So I think that is the area where we need to work. For that, I would say education and skill are the two areas.
All right. We've run out of time. Quickly, closing comments from Gautam Mukherjee and Mitali, and then we're going to take a break. Gautam?
Well, the main thing is, once the phrase was eat your food, there are people starving in India. And in the West, this was more or less, a given. But consider how far we've come. Under the British, when we had 200 to 300 million people, there were famines every 10 years that killed millions of people who just dropped dead in the street from lack of food. We've never seen a famine in independent India. Even when we were at 2% and 1%, we begged, borrowed, stole, but there were no famines. Today, we make the most milk in the world. We make the most rice in the world. We are food surplus at 1.45 billion people. So, it's paradoxical. Sure, you can look at many aspects which are not growing as fast as one would like, but they are growing. They're creeping along if necessary. Some are walking, some are crawling, but everybody's life is getting better. And this is why we're going to eliminate poverty in the next 2 years.
Fair enough. Mitali, 30 seconds, please.
Yeah, so I think I'll just respond very quickly that the total value of women's unpaid care work in India stands at between 15 to 17% of GDP as per a calculation that we've done here at Nicole Associates. And if we start to monetize that value of the GDP, just imagine what the size of the Indian economy can be.
All right. Fair enough. On that note, on that good note, we conclude our conversation. But thank you, everyone, for being a part of this very positive and affirmative conversation. We take a short break on that note. We'll be right back.